Hi, welcome back to Tiny Apartment Brewing. Today we're going to have a short question and answer session where my partner is going to ask me some questions about brewing and I'm going to answer them. Go ahead and ask me some questions. My partner's asking me questions.
What got you into home brewing?
It was interesting. I was working in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and one of the guys that I worked with was just getting into home brewing, and it turned out there was a homebrew store about a mile down the road from where we worked. And lots of times we'd get down there at lunch and we'd poke through and learn about stuff and talk to the folks there at the homebrew store because they were very, very helpful at that place.
Do you remember your first beer that you ever brewed?
I do. It came out okay. It was a real simple beer. Back then you could buy buy malt extract that was already hopped. So you just had to mix it up with water, throw in some yeast, and make a beer with it. It's funny because the first thing, though, that I ever brewed was not beer. It was a mead. I was on vacation in Canada. I don't remember where I was, but there was a place selling yeasts, and one of the yeast packets had mead stamped on it. And I'd been fascinated with the idea of mead. Mead is a wine that's made with honey instead of grapes as the source of sugar for fermentation. And for some reason, I've always been fascinated. I still make meads once in a while. But this channel is going to be mostly about beer. So anyway, I made this mead with this weird mead yeast, and it sat for almost a month just bubbling slowly, slow fermentation. And it came out with a very, very odd taste that when I was researching meads, the taste described was Listerine, and that's just what it tasted like, Listerine. It was horrible.
Well, that sounds delightful. What's your favorite style of beer to brew?
Actually, the favorite style of beer to brew is one that I just made a week ago. It's a stout. Because for some reason, when I make a stout beer, it's sweeter or something. It makes the whole house smell much better than other kinds of beer.
How about to drink? What's your favorite homebrew style of beer to drink?
I like to drink stouts. I like to drink porters. I like to drink IPAs, pale ales, that kind of thing. Mostly British styles, although I do make some like West Coast American style IPAs with the American hops, which have a definite different flavor profile than the European hops that are done with English beers.
Interesting. So what are the biggest challenges of brewing in a small space?
There's multiple challenges. We have challenges of storage for equipment. We have challenges of storing for ingredients. I've got one 5-gallon bucket of grains that's overflowing right now because I've got lots of different flavor grains in there. Keeping equipment put away. I've got a closet that's basically it's nothing in there but my brewing equipment, and I don't have a whole lot of brewing equipment. I've let a lot of it go when I downsized.
How do you manage things like temperature control?
For temperature control, for fermentation. I brew ales. I don't have the temperature control. I need a temperature control like 40 to 50 degrees to brew lagers, which that's what they need. But ales are good from 65 to 70 degrees. Here in Florida, we're never much below 75 degrees, so I have made what's called a swamp cooler for my fermentation area. And it's a tub with water in it and a wrap. It's kind of a towel cloth wrap that goes around my fermentation bucket that wicks the water up, and then it evaporates, and that evaporative cooling cools down my fermenting wort to about 70 degrees, which is the temperature that I want it to be.
How does an ale differ from other beers?
Okay, ales and lagers. Lagers were a type of yeast that was developed in Germany. They ferment at cooler temperatures, 40 to 50 degrees, and they ferment very slowly. They would put their beers to ferment in a cave that was like 45 degrees, and they'd leave them there for 3, 4, 5 months. That's called lagering, leaving it to slowly ferment. Ale yeasts ferment much more quickly, and they ferment at higher temperatures, typically, like I said, 65 to 70 degrees. Lager yeast will produce a much cleaner tasting beer, but it takes longer, and as I said, you need much cooler fermentation temperatures for a lager yeast to work. If you try to ferment a lager yeast at the warmer temperatures, you get all kinds of weird off flavors.
What are some space-saving hacks you've come up with?
I've gone to fermenting in 2-gallon buckets and 1-gallon glass fermenters rather than the typical 6.5-gallon fermenting bucket that you use for usual beers that you're making 5 gallons of. I'm only making 1.5 gallons, so I'm just using smaller buckets. I've got a much smaller space to ferment in, so yeah. And I'm doing it on the stovetop. I did have some big gas burners that I've used in the past, and I had an all-in-one electronic fermentation unit that would mash my beer and boil it all in one unit. And those are all gone. I had to let them go when I downsized. And that was set up to do 5 gallons. I just couldn't do a 1 gallon in that type of equipment.
Is there a brewing gadget or tool you cannot live without?
Yes. My thermometer. I use my thermometer every time I brew to heat my strike water up to the proper temperature to put the grains in, and sometimes I even use it when I'm approaching boil to make sure that I don't get going too fast because I don't want to have a boil over. I also use it to check my fermentation temperature. I just slip it down in between the cloth and the bucket just to check the temperature in my fermentation room.
This is the last question. Stoves. Tell me the difference between brewing on a gas stove versus an electric stove.
There are some differences. One of the things with brewing and cooking with gas is you have pinpoint control of your temperature. If you want to turn the temperature down, it comes right down because you're turning the flame down. With an electric stove, you've got some heat energy in that burner, so if you're trying to slow things down, you turn it down, it doesn't slow down and it doesn't speed up as quickly as the gas burner does. But one of the things that I noticed when I started brewing my 1-gallon batches on this electric stove is surprisingly, it would bring my wort to a boil faster than the gas stove did, which surprised me greatly.
This is the final question. How does the apartment smell on brew day? Be honest.
Okay, this is always an interesting question, whether, it's based upon your gender. As I found most times, guys love the smell of brewing beer. I love it. All the guys in any brew club that I was ever in loved it. My son-in-law loved it. My partner here that's asking me the questions absolutely hates it and turns her stomach. Most women it does. My late wife hated the smell of it. Anytime we had female guests over and I was brewing beers, they were like, "Oh, it's disgusting." So yeah, it depends on your gender. Most women don't like the smell of boiling wort. Most guys do. Now, I'll throw a caveat in on that. If you're in some place like the Budweiser plant where they're boiling Budweiser beer, that does not smell as nice as my beer. It's very, very sour smell because they're using different grains. They're making a different beer.
What do you suppose is the ingredients, the ingredient that is giving it that foul smell for women?
I don't really know. I just suspect it's the grains themselves. Because, like I said, if you're using just a plain grain like Budweiser does, although Budweiser's also using rice adjuncts and corn adjuncts in some of their beer, and I think that's where some of the sour smell comes from. But when I'm making beers, most of mine have extra adjunct grains that are much sweeter than the plain base grains, so that's where I find the very sweet smell of the boiling wort comes from.
My curiosity is satisfied. Thank you.
And by the way, you are listening to my partner who also has a YouTube channel called Timelessly Sandy, which she'd like you to view. Have a good one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me.